The autumn wind whipped through Charlotte Harrington's dark curls as she stepped off the train in Silver Creek, Colorado. Her entire world was packed into 3 worn suitcases. After traveling 2,000 miles from Philadelphia, she had left behind the cramped tenement rooms and endless shifts at the garment factory for the promise of marriage to a man she knew only through 4 months of correspondence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Nathaniel Sullivan had described his prosperous silver mining business and the sprawling Victorian home that awaited her, nestled against the majestic Rocky Mountains. But as Charlotte surveyed the dusty platform of Silver Creek Station, the knot in her stomach tightened. There was no sign of Nathaniel, no welcoming party to greet his bride-to-be. Instead, a solemn-faced woman in a nurse's uniform approached her, clutching a letter in her gloved hand. "Miss Harrington?" she asked, though her expression suggested she already knew exactly who Charlotte was. "I'm afraid I have difficult news about Mr. Sullivan. What follows is a tale of deathbed promises, hidden fortunes, and a secret identity that would transform Charlotte Harrington's life in ways she never could have imagined when she boarded that eastbound train." The crisp October air of 1882 carried the scent of pine and coal smoke as Charlotte clutched the letter from the nurse, her gloved hands trembling. The nurse, who had introduced herself as Martha Reynolds, waited patiently as Charlotte's eyes scanned the hastily written note. "He's dying," Charlotte whispered, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "But his last letter arrived just 2 weeks ago. He mentioned nothing of illness." "It came on suddenly Martha explained, her weathered face softening with sympathy. "And pneumonia took hold last week, and the doctor says—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Mr. Sullivan doesn't have much time left. He's been asking for you." Charlotte swallowed hard, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. She had spent her life's savings on this journey west, had resigned from her position at Blackwell's garment factory, had bid farewell to the only home she'd ever known. Now, instead of a wedding, she faced a funeral. "His carriage is waiting," Martha continued, gesturing toward an elegant black brougham with silver trim parked at the edge of the station. "He insisted we bring you straight to the house." The ride through Silver Creek revealed a town far more prosperous than Charlotte had imagined from Nathaniel's letters. Grand storefronts lined the main street, and imposing brick buildings housed banks and offices. Clearly the silver mines had brought wealth to this remote mountain community. "Has Mr. Sullivan been a resident here long?" Charlotte asked, trying to gather her composure. Martha's hands tightened slightly on her handbag. "About 5 years, came with nothing but determination and a knowledge of mining that bordered on uncanny. Now he owns the most productive silver mine in the county and half the businesses in town." She studied Charlotte's face. "He never mentioned his past to you?" "Only that he was from Boston originally," Charlotte replied, realizing how little she actually knew about the man she had agreed to marry. His letters had been filled with descriptions of Colorado, questions about her interests and beliefs, and practical plans for their future together. Personal history had been notably absent. The carriage turned onto a tree-lined drive that wound upward into the foothills. After several minutes, a grand house came into view. A 3-story Victorian with elaborate gingerbread trim, wide porches, and a distinctive turret room at one corner. Despite the circumstances, Charlotte couldn't help but admire its elegance. "Silver crest," Martha announced. "Mr. Sullivan designed it himself." The carriage had barely stopped when the front door opened and a distinguished older man stepped out, medical bag in hand. "Dr. Patterson," Martha explained as they descended from the carriage. "Mr. Sullivan's physician." The doctor approached with a grim expression. "Miss Harrington, I'm afraid Mr. Sullivan has taken a turn for the worse." If you wish to speak with him while he's still lucid, we should go inside immediately. Charlotte nodded, suddenly terrified. She had prepared herself for marriage to a stranger, but not for watching that stranger die. Still, something compelled her forward, perhaps the same courage that had driven her to answer his advertisement in the first place. The interior of Silver Crest was as impressive as its exterior. Gleaming hardwood floors, imported furniture, and artwork that spoke of cultured taste. But Charlotte barely registered these details as she followed Dr. Patterson up the grand staircase and down a long hallway to a set of double doors. "He's very weak," the doctor warned before opening the doors. "Try not to excite him." The master bedroom was spacious, with tall windows that would normally flood the space with light. Now, heavy curtains had been drawn, leaving the room in shadow. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space, and in it lay a figure so still that Charlotte momentarily feared they had arrived too late. But as they approached, the man in the bed opened his eyes, striking blue eyes that seemed to pierce through the dimness of the room. Those eyes fixed on Charlotte with an intensity that made her breath catch. Nathaniel Sullivan was not at all what she had expected. From his letters, she had imagined a robust businessman in his 40s, perhaps greying at the temples. The man before her was younger, perhaps 35, with features that might once have been handsome before illness had hollowed his cheeks and yellowed his skin. A neatly trimmed beard couldn't hide the gauntness of his face. "Charlotte," he said, his voice barely audible, "you came." He extended a trembling hand. She stepped forward and took it, surprised by the strength of his grip despite his condition. "Of course I came, Mr. Sullivan." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Nathaniel, please, I had hoped to welcome you properly, to show you Silver Creek, to court you as you deserve before our wedding." A cough racked his body, and Dr. Patterson stepped forward with a handkerchief. When the coughing subsided, Nathaniel gestured weakly toward chairs beside the bed. "Please, sit. There's so little time and so much I must tell you." Charlotte settled into a chair, her mind racing. What could he possibly need to tell her? They were strangers despite their correspondence. She was prepared to offer comfort to a dying man, but beyond that— "Leave us," Nathaniel said to Martha and the doctor, his tone suddenly commanding despite his weakness. Dr. Patterson frowned. "Mr. Sullivan, I don't think—" "Please," Nathaniel interrupted. "What I must discuss with Miss Harrington is private. I'll call if I need assistance." After a moment's hesitation, the doctor nodded. 10 minutes, no more. Your strength is limited." Once they were alone, Nathaniel's demeanor changed. His gaze became more focused, more urgent. "Charlotte, I've deceived you, though not in the ways that matter most." Charlotte stiffened. "Deceived me?" "My name is not Nathaniel Sullivan. At least it wasn't always." He paused, clearly struggling for breath. "My real name is Nathan Sinclair." The name meant nothing to Charlotte, and her confusion must have shown on her face. "The Sinclair family of Boston," he clarified. "My father was Edward Sinclair, railroad magnate and philanthropist." Now recognition dawned. The Sinclairs were one of the wealthiest families in America. Their name appeared regularly in newspaper society pages, even those read by factory workers in Philadelphia. "I don't understand," Charlotte said. "Why would you hide such a thing? Why come to Colorado under a false name?" Nathan's eyes closed briefly, as if gathering strength. "Because 5 years ago, I discovered something terrible. My father and his business partners were involved in a scheme that resulted in the deaths of 37 workers on the transcontinental line. Deaths that were covered up, ruled as accidents when they were the result of criminal negligence." Charlotte's mind reeled. This was far from the simple deathbed confession she had anticipated. "I confronted him," Nathan continued, "threatened to take evidence to the authorities. That night there was an attempt on my life. A suspicious carriage accident that killed my driver instead of me." His fingers tightened around hers. "I knew then I had to disappear. I faked my death in a boating accident, took my mother's maiden name, Sullivan, and came west with what little I could carry." "And you built all this," Charlotte said, gesturing to indicate the house and, by extension, his mining empire. A weak smile touched his lips. "I had a good education in geology and business, if nothing else, but I've lived in fear, looking over my shoulder. My father died last year, but his partners remain powerful. If they knew I was alive, that I still have evidence against them." Another coughing fit interrupted him, more severe than the last. Charlotte reached for the bell to summon the doctor, but Nathan caught her wrist. "Not yet," he gasped, when the coughing subsided. "There's more you must know." He reached beneath his pillow and withdrew an envelope. "This contains my will, leaving everything to you, the mine, this house, my investments. It's all legally binding under the name Nathaniel Sullivan." Charlotte shook her head in disbelief. "You can't be serious. We've never even met before today." "Surely you have family, friends, no one I trust with what must be done," he interrupted. "Charlotte, I chose you for a reason. Your letters revealed not just intelligence, but integrity. You wrote of justice, of your work with the women's labor movement in Philadelphia." His blue eyes burned with fevered intensity. "I need someone who will use my fortune for the right purpose, to expose those responsible for those deaths and bring them to justice. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." From beneath the bed covers, he produced a small key. "In the turret room, behind the painting of Mount Elbert, there's a hidden safe. This key opens it. Inside, you'll find documented evidence against the men responsible, including my written testimony, and there's something else, something they would kill for." Charlotte felt as though she had stepped into a novel. Secret identities, hidden fortunes, deathbed confessions. It was too fantastic to be real, yet the desperation in Nathan's eyes could not be feigned. "You're asking me to take on powerful men, to risk my own safety," she said, trying to understand the full implications of his request. "I'm asking you to assume my identity in a way, to become Mrs. Sullivan, mistress of Silvercrest, with the resources to finish what I started." His voice grew weaker. "In return, you gain financial independence most women can only dream of. You need never work in a factory again." An extraordinary proposal from a dying man she had known for less than an hour. Yet Charlotte found herself considering it. What awaited her back in Philadelphia? A crowded tenement, punishing work, spinsterhood. "The town already knows you as my intended bride," Nathan continued. "Martha and Dr. Patterson are loyal. They'll support whatever narrative protects the mission. The rest of my staff knows only what they need to." A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Patterson entered without waiting for a response, his expression making it clear that their time was up. "Just a moment more," Nathan pleaded. When the doctor reluctantly stepped back, Nathan turned to Charlotte with renewed urgency. "I know this is overwhelming. You didn't agree to any of this when you answered my advertisement. If you wish to return to Philadelphia, the envelope contains enough money for your journey." His fingers tightened around the key he had pressed into her palm. "But if you stay, if you take up this cause, you could change the lives of countless workers like those you left behind." Dr. Patterson approached the bed, medical bag in hand. "Mr. Sullivan, I must insist. Will you stay?" Nathan whispered, his eyes locked on Charlotte's, ignoring the doctor entirely. The question hung in the air between them. Charlotte thought of her cramped room in Philadelphia, of the women who worked beside her at Blackwell's. Many missing. Fingers, some with damaged lungs from the textile dust, all working 14-hour days for pitiful wages. She thought of her own parents, both lost to factory accidents before she was 16. She thought, too, of the risk. If what Nathan said was true, powerful men would stop at nothing to protect themselves from exposure. But hadn't she traveled? We're seeking transformation, a new life, a new identity. Yes, she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll stay. Relief washed over Nathan's gaunt features. He reached for her hand once more, pressing the key firmly into her palm and folding her fingers over it. The safe, he whispered. Tonight. Don't trust. Another coughing fit seized him, more violent than before. Dr. Patterson rushed forward, calling for Martha. In the chaos that followed, Charlotte found herself backed against the wall, still clutching the key as blood flecked Nathan's lips and his body convulsed. Miss Harrington, please wait outside, Dr. Patterson ordered, as Martha hurried in with a basin of water and clean cloths. Dazed, Charlotte stepped into the hallway. Through the partially open door, she could hear Nathan's labored breathing, the doctor's urgent instructions, Martha's efficient movements. She stood there, the key digging into her palm, her mind reeling with the enormity of what she had just agreed to. After what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes, the sounds from within the room quieted. Dr. Patterson emerged, his face grave. He's asking for you again, he said softly. It won't be long now. Charlotte returned to Nathan's bedside. His blue eyes, now clouded with pain, found hers immediately. The turret room, he whispered, so quietly she had to lean close to hear him. Tonight. Charlotte nodded, fighting back tears for this stranger who had just entrusted her with his fortune, his legacy, and his quest for justice. Behind the painting, he continued, each word clearly costing him tremendous effort. Letters, proof, and the witness. Before Charlotte could ask what witness he meant, Nathan's hand gripped hers with surprising strength. They'll come looking, he gasped. Trust no one from Boston. His next words were so faint that Charlotte had to press her, ear close to his lips to hear them. Remember, in assuming my name, you also assume my enemies. With these ominous words, Nathan Sinclair, known to Silver Creek as Nathaniel Sullivan, drew his final breath, leaving Charlotte alone in a strange house, in a strange town, with a fortune she hadn't sought, and a dangerous mission she hadn't anticipated. As Martha gently closed Nathan's eyes and Dr. Patterson noted the time of death in his journal, Charlotte slipped the key into her pocket. Beyond the windows of Silver Crest, the sun was setting behind the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. By morning, the news would spread throughout Silver Creek. Nathaniel Sullivan was dead. His mail-order bride arrived just in time to become his widow. Charlotte Harrington, who had stepped off the train just hours ago seeking a husband, now found herself the mistress of Silver Crest, heir to a mining empire and keeper of secrets that powerful men would kill to protect. As she stood by the bed of the man she had never truly known, she realized that her journey had only just begun. Charlotte stood at the window of the guest bedroom Martha had prepared for her, watching as lanterns flickered to life across Silver Creek in the valley below. The town looked like a constellation fallen to earth, each light a star against the darkening landscape. How different from Philadelphia's crowded streets and soot-stained buildings. The events of the day swirled in, her mind like autumn leaves caught in a gust of wind. Just 12 hours ago, she had stepped off the train, expecting to meet her future husband. Now she was his widow, though they had never exchanged vows. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Martha entered, carrying a tray with tea and sandwiches. "You haven't eaten since your arrival, Miss Harrington," the nurse said, setting the tray on a small table. "You'll need your strength for what's ahead." Charlotte turned from the window. "What exactly is ahead, Martha? Did you know who he really was?" Martha's weathered face revealed nothing as she poured the tea. "I knew Mr. Sullivan had secrets. In 5 years as his housekeeper, I learned to respect his privacy." She handed Charlotte a cup. but I know a good man when I meet one. Whatever his past, he treated his workers fairly and helped families in need without seeking recognition. Charlotte sank into a chair, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. He mentioned evidence in the turret room. A witness, though I don't understand what he meant by that. Martha's eyes darted to the door, which remained slightly ajar. She moved to close it before speaking again, her voice lowered. The turret room was his private study. No one enters, without his permission, not even me. Whatever is there, he meant it for you alone. She hesitated. Will you stay, then? Take on what he's left you. I haven't decided, Charlotte replied, though the key in her pocket felt like a weight, a responsibility. Already accepted. Martha nodded, accepting the answer without judgment. Dr. Patterson has made arrangements for the funeral the day after tomorrow. Until then, you should rest. The coming days will bring questions from the town, from Mr. Sullivan's business associates. She paused. From the lawyer. Lawyer? Mr. Reynolds, my husband, as it happens. He handles all of Mr. Sullivan's legal affairs. He'll want to discuss the will with you. Charlotte set down her teacup with a shaky hand. Martha, I'm not sure I'm prepared for this. I came here to be a wife, not to inherit a fortune and whatever else Mr. Sullivan has entrusted to me. Older woman's face softened. Few of us are prepared for the turns our lives take, Miss Harrington. My Frank and I came west 15 years ago to farm. The drought took our crops and typhoid took our only son. Yet here we are. He is a lawyer, me a nurse and housekeeper. We adapt. She straightened the bed covers with practiced efficiency. I suggest you explore Silver Crest tomorrow. Get to know the house that's now yours. Mr. Sullivan's personal quarters are at the end of this hallway. The turret room is accessible, only through his bedroom. After Martha left, Charlotte forced herself to eat, though she tasted nothing. Her practical nature asserted itself as she considered her options. She could take the money Nathan had promised for her return journey and go back east. Back to what? The factory wouldn't rehire her, and her room at the boarding house was already occupied by another desperate woman. Or she could stay, assume the identity of Nathaniel Sullivan's widow, and use his fortune to expose powerful men who had caused the deaths of innocent workers. The choice seemed simultaneously clear and impossible. Sleep eluded her that night. Every creak of the settling house, every whisper of wind against the windows, had her sitting upright, imagining Nathan's enemies already closing in. By dawn, her decision was made. She would at least examine the contents of the safe before determining her course. The house was quiet as Charlotte made her way down the hallway to Nathan's bedroom. Sunlight streamed through windows that had been shrouded the day before, illuminating a space both masculine and refined. A large four-poster bed dominated the room, its covers smoothed in death as they never might have been in life. A wardrobe of polished mahogany stood against one wall, and a writing desk occupied a corner near the window, papers neatly stacked as if awaiting attention that would never come. On the far side of the room, a narrow door stood partially open. Charlotte approached it cautiously, half expecting to find someone waiting for her. Instead, she discovered a spiral staircase leading upward into the turret. The turret room was smaller than she had imagined, but its windows on all sides offered commanding views of the mountains, the town, and the road leading to Silver Crest. A desk beneath the eastern window held stacks of mining reports and correspondence. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on geology, law, and surprisingly, social reform. It took Charlotte only moments to locate the painting Nathan had mentioned, a striking landscape of a snow-capped mountain, which she presumed was Mount Elbert. The painting swung away from the wall on hidden hinges, revealing a small wall safe with a keyhole. The key from her pocket fit perfectly. The safe door opened smoothly, revealing several leather-bound journals, a stack of documents, tied with string, and a small wooden box. Charlotte removed these items and placed them on the desk, her heart racing. The topmost journal bore a date 5 years earlier. Opening it, she recognized Nathan's handwriting from his letters, though here it was more hurried, more urgent. The first entry confirmed his incredible story. April 15th, 1877. I have done what I never imagined possible. I have abandoned my name, my home, my identity. Nathan Sinclair is dead, drowned in Boston Harbor, according to this morning's papers. Nathaniel Sullivan lives, traveling west with evidence that would destroy my father and his associates if revealed. The irony doesn't escape me that in dying, I have perhaps finally begun to live with purpose. Charlotte spent the next hour reading entries that detailed Nathan's discovery of falsified safety reports, diverted funds meant for reinforcing tunnel, supports and correspondence between his father and other railroad executives discussing how to minimize financial exposure in the event of worker incidents. The documents from the safe provided concrete evidence, original letters with signatures and company seals, ledgers showing misappropriated funds, and most damning of all, a list of the 37 men who had died when a tunnel collapsed, alongside notes indicating that engineers had warned of the danger weeks earlier. Finally, Charlotte turned to the wooden box. Inside lay a silver pocket watch, a small leather-bound Bible, and a sealed envelope addressed simply, "To my successor." With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. To whoever reads this, if you are reading these words, I have failed in my mission to bring the truth to light and have chosen you as my heir, not just in property but in purpose. The evidence in this safe proves criminal negligence in the deaths of 37 men, but documents alone may not be enough against the power of the Sinclair name and fortune. What my enemies fear most is not these papers, but the living witness, a man named Thomas Grant, former engineer for the Central Pacific Railroad. Grant warned of the unsafe conditions repeatedly and was dismissed for his trouble 1 week before the collapse. When he tried to speak out afterward, he was beaten nearly to death and left with a warning that his family would be next. I found Grant living under an assumed name in Denver 3 years ago. After gaining his trust, I helped him establish a new identity here in Silver Creek. He now works as the bookkeeper at my mine under the name Timothy Green. Only he and I know his true identity, and he remains in hiding, fearful for his life. Grant's testimony combined with these documents would be irrefutable. Yet he has refused to come forward without absolute assurance of his family's safety, a wife and daughter living in Sacramento who believe him dead for their own protection. This is the true inheritance I leave you, not just wealth, but the sacred duty to protect Grant and finally expose those responsible for the tragedy that has consumed my final years. Choose carefully whom to trust. My attorney, Franklin Reynolds, knows nothing of my true identity or mission. The mine foreman, Samuel Tucker, is loyal, but knows only that Green is under my protection, not why. One last warning. If my true identity has somehow been discovered, you may already be in danger. 3 months ago, I received an anonymous note suggesting someone was digging into the past. I have been careful, but not careful enough, perhaps. May you succeed where I have failed. Nathan Sinclair, Nathaniel Sullivan. Charlotte set the letter down, her mind reeling. This was far more complex and dangerous than she had imagined. Not only was she inheriting Nathan's fortune and identity, but also the responsibility for a hidden witness whose life depended on her discretion. A soft knock at the bedroom door startled her from these thoughts. Hastily returning everything to the safe except the journal she'd been reading, Charlotte locked it and swung the painting back into place. "Miss Harrington," Martha's voice called. "Mr. Reynolds has arrived to discuss the will." "Just a moment," Charlotte replied, tucking the journal under a cushion on the window seat and smoothing her skirts before descending the spiral staircase. Franklin Reynolds proved to be a man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and a manner that put Charlotte instantly at ease. They sat in the parlor, a formal room with velvet drapes and furniture more ornate than practical. "First, please accept my condolences," Reynolds began. "I understand you and Nathaniel had never met in person before yesterday, which makes this situation all the more unusual." "Thank you," Charlotte replied simply, unsure what else to say. Reynolds opened his briefcase and removed several documents. "Nathaniel revised his will just last month, after your agreement to marry was finalized. The terms are unusually generous but entirely legal." He adjusted his spectacles. "To be direct, Miss Harrington, he has left you everything, the house, the mine, his investments, bank accounts, everything." Though she had known this from Nathan himself, hearing it stated so officially made it suddenly, overwhelmingly real. "That's extraordinarily generous for a man I barely knew." "Nathaniel was an extraordinary man," Reynolds replied. "Private, sometimes enigmatic, but with a keen sense of justice." He hesitated. "The will includes one unusual provision. While everything transfers to you immediately, he specifically requested that you retain ownership of the mine for at least 1 year before considering any offers to sell." Charlotte thought of the hidden papers of Thomas Grant working at the mine under a false identity. "I have no intention of selling," she assured him. Reynolds smiled. "That's good to hear. Too many outside interests have been buying up local operations. Lately, consolidation rarely benefits the workers or the community." He shuffled through the papers. "Now, there are some formalities to address. As a single woman, you have the legal right to own property in Colorado Territory, but there may be those who question your ability to manage such extensive holdings." "Because I'm a woman," Charlotte stated flatly. "Precisely." Nathaniel anticipated this. "He's arranged for Samuel Tucker, his mine foreman, to handle day-to-day operations. Tucker reports directly to you, but his expertise will ease the transition." Reynolds leaned forward slightly. "May I offer some unsolicited advice, Miss Harrington?" "Please. Silver Creek is a small town with traditional values. Your position as Nathaniel's widow would be more secure if the marriage had been formalized before his passing." Charlotte understood immediately. "You're suggesting we pretend we married before he died?" "I'm suggesting that if such an understanding were to exist, it would simplify matters considerably. A private ceremony, perhaps, with only Martha and myself as witnesses." Reynolds removed his spectacles, polishing them with a handkerchief. "No, one could dispute it, and the legality of the will would be beyond question." The implication was clear. As merely Nathaniel's intended bride, Charlotte's claim might be challenged. As his widow, her position would be unassailable. "Who would question the will?" she asked. Reynolds replaced his spectacles. Nathaniel had business associates in Denver and San Francisco who expected to benefit from his passing. He was not forthcoming about his background before arriving in Silver Creek, but success breeds curiosity. There have been inquiries from Eastern law firms about his estate even before his illness. Eastern law firms. Nathan's warning echoed in her mind. "Trust no one from Boston." "I believe a private marriage ceremony would be appropriate," Charlotte decided, calculating rapidly. "Perhaps you could suggest that it took place the evening of my arrival, with you and Martha as witnesses." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "I'll prepare the documentation immediately, and I'll inform Judge Wilson of the circumstances. He's a reasonable man and a friend." After Reynolds departed, Charlotte returned to the turret room, retrieving the journal from its hiding place. She spent the afternoon reading Nathan's chronicle of his life in Silver Creek, his establishment of the mine, his careful construction of a new identity, his growing paranoia about being discovered. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, Charlotte heard the approach of horses. From the turret windows, she observed a carriage making its way up the drive to Silver Crest. Two men disembarked, one tall and broad-shouldered, with the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors, the other shorter, with spectacles and a leather satchel. Martha appeared at the door of the turret room. "Samuel Tucker and Timothy Green, to see you, Miss Harrington. They've come from the mine to pay their respects." Timothy Green, Thomas Grant, the hidden witness. Charlotte's pulse quickened. "I'll receive them in the study downstairs." She followed Martha down the spiral staircase and through the main house to Nathan's study, a wood-panelled room with a large desk and leather chairs. Through its windows, she could see the setting sun painting the mountains in hues of rose and gold. The men entered, hats in hand. Samuel Tucker was exactly as his appearance had suggested, a practical man more comfortable underground than in a formal parlour. He offered awkward condolences and assured Charlotte that operations at the mine continued smoothly. But it was Timothy Green who captured her attention. A slight man in his 40s, with prematurely grey hair and nervous hands. He avoided direct eye contact as he offered quiet words of sympathy. There was nothing remarkable about him, which perhaps was the point, the perfect disguise for a man. In hiding was complete unremarkability. "Mr. Sullivan spoke highly of you both," Charlotte said, studying Green carefully for any sign of recognition, any hint that he knew she was aware of his true identity. "He was a fair employer," Tucker replied. "The men respected him. They'll work just as hard for his widow." Charlotte noted the word widow with interest. Reynolds had wasted no time in establishing the narrative of their marriage. "Mr. Green," she said directly, "I understand you manage the mine's accounts." The man adjusted his spectacles. "Still not," meeting her gaze. "Yes, ma'am, 5 years now. Mr. Sullivan mentioned your exceptional attention to detail. Perhaps you could review the accounts with me tomorrow? I should understand the business I've inherited." Now he looked up, and Charlotte caught a flicker of something, wariness, assessment, in his eyes. "Of course, Mrs. Sullivan, I'd be happy." "Two." The use of her supposed married name felt strange, yet appropriate. She was indeed becoming Mrs. Sullivan in more ways than one, assuming not just the name, but the dangerous quest that came with it. After the men departed, Charlotte returned to the turret room with renewed purpose. The sun had fully set now, and Silver Creek twinkled below, a reflection of the emerging stars above. She lit a lamp and reopened the safe, examining each document carefully, constructing a mental map of the conspiracy Nathan had died trying to expose. The miners' deaths, the cover-up, the powerful men behind it, all were detailed in Nathan's meticulous records. But to bring them to justice would require Thomas Grant's testimony, and to secure that, she would need to guarantee the safety of a family in Sacramento who believed their husband and father dead. As Charlotte replaced the documents in the safe, she caught sight of her reflection in the turret window. Her figure, superimposed against the night sky, the mountains a dark silhouette beyond. The woman who stared back at her seemed different somehow from the one who had stepped off the train just a day earlier, more determined, more resolute. That woman had come west seeking security through marriage. This woman had found something else entirely, a purpose worthy of the risk it entailed. With new-found clarity, Charlotte knew she would not be returning east. She would become Nathaniel Sullivan's widow in truth, if not in fact. She would protect Thomas Grant, and she would use every resource at her disposal to complete the mission Nathan had begun. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of a train whistle. Another new arrival to Silver Creek, perhaps, or something more ominous. Nathan's warning lingered in her mind. "In assuming my name, You also assume my enemies. Charlotte closed the safe and locked it, the key once again secure in her pocket. Tomorrow she would meet with Thomas Grant and begin to unravel the conspiracy that had claimed 37 lives and driven Nathan Sinclair to abandon his identity. Tonight, she would prepare herself for the role of a lifetime, becoming Mrs. Nathaniel Sullivan, mistress of Silver Crest and keeper of dangerous secrets. Whatever came next, there was no turning back. The morning of Nathaniel Sullivan's funeral brought a cold, driving rain that transformed the dirt roads of Silver Creek into rivers of mud. Charlotte stood at the window of her bedroom, dressed in a black morning gown that Martha had altered hastily the night before, watching as carriages struggled up the slope toward Silver Crest. "It's time, Mrs. Sullivan," Martha said, entering with a black veil. The housekeeper had effortlessly transitioned to using Charlotte's new married name, cementing the fiction that would protect her position. The funeral was held in the grand parlor of Silver Crest rather than the town church, ostensibly due to the weather, but in truth because Nathan, or Nathaniel, as Charlotte forced herself to think of him, had rarely attended services. Reverend Michaels from the local Presbyterian church officiated nonetheless, speaking of a man he had barely known, with generalities that could have applied to anyone. Charlotte observed the gathering from behind her veil. Samuel Tucker stood stoically near the door, his massive frame somehow diminished by the formal black suit that clearly made him uncomfortable. Timothy Green, Thomas Grant, the hidden witness, sat rigidly in a corner, eyes constantly moving as if assessing potential threats. Franklin Reynolds and his wife Martha remained close to Charlotte, a united front of support, but it was the other attendees who truly captured her attention, men in expensive suits who introduced themselves as business associates from Denver, San Francisco, even Chicago. They offered condolences while examining the house with calculating eyes, as if already assessing its value. "James Holloway," said a distinguished man with silver hair and a precisely trimmed beard, taking Charlotte's gloved hand. "I represent Western Mining Consortium. Nathaniel and I had been discussing a potential partnership before his unfortunate passing." "How interesting," Charlotte replied coolly. "He never mentioned it." Holloway's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened slightly. "It was preliminary. Perhaps we might discuss it after a suitable mourning period." "Perhaps," Charlotte replied non-committally, "though I've been advised to make no business decisions for at least a year." "A year is a long time in mining," Holloway observed. "Opportunities appear and vanish quickly." "Then I suppose they weren't truly opportunities at all, but merely temptations," Charlotte replied, noticing how Holloway's eyes narrowed at her. Response. After the brief service and an even briefer eulogy delivered by Franklin Reynolds, the attendees moved to the dining room, where refreshments had been arranged. Charlotte circulated as propriety demanded, accepting condolences and deflecting questions about her plans for the mine with practiced vagueness. She was pouring tea when she overheard a fragment of conversation from the adjoining room, Holloway speaking to another man in hushed tones. "Waste of time. She knows nothing of mining. Tucker runs the operation, and he can be bought. Sullivan was stubborn about selling. Let's hope the widow is more practical. The Chicago office wants this property. They don't care how we acquire it." Charlotte nearly dropped the teapot. Western Mining Consortium had offices in Chicago. Could they be connected to the same interests Nathan had been investigating? She filed the information away, determining to ask Thomas Grant when they met later that day. As the gathering dispersed, Charlotte noted with unease that several attendees remained in deep conversation with Samuel Tucker on the front porch. Tucker's expression was inscrutable as he listened to whatever proposition was being made. "The vultures circle already," Martha observed, appearing at Charlotte's side as the last carriage departed. And not just for mine? What do you mean? Martha's weathered face creased with concern. A gentleman from the Denver Chronicle was asking about you. Your background, how long you and Nathaniel corresponded before you agreed to marry. Seemed particularly interested in whether you had family back east who might wish to know of your good fortune. A chill ran through Charlotte that had nothing to do with the rain still pattering against the windows. What did you tell him? That you were an orphan, as was indeed mentioned in town when Nathaniel announced your impending arrival. I said you had worked respectable jobs in Philadelphia, had no living relatives, and had corresponded with Nathaniel for nearly a year. It was close enough to the truth to be believable. Charlotte had lost her parents years ago, though she did have a married sister in Pittsburgh whom she rarely saw. Thank you, Martha. Your quick thinking is invaluable. It's not thinking that's needed now, but caution, Martha replied. Silver Creek has always had its share of gossip, but this feels different. People asking questions that have nothing to do with ordinary curiosity. Timothy Green arrived promptly at 3 o'clock as arranged, carrying a leather portfolio of account books and ledgers. Charlotte received him in Nathaniel's study, instructing Martha to ensure they weren't disturbed. Thank you for coming, Mr. Green, Charlotte began once they were alone. I appreciate your willingness to help me understand the mine's operations. Green set his portfolio on the desk, his movements precise, controlled. Of course, Mrs. Sullivan, it's my duty. Charlotte studied him, this unremarkable man with nervous hands and watchful eyes. Nothing about him suggested he was the key witness in a case against some of the most powerful men in America. But then, that was precisely the point. She rose to check that the study door was fully closed, then turned to face him directly. I think we can dispense with pretense, Mr. Grant. The color drained from his face, and his hand moved instinctively toward his inside pocket before he caught himself. I don't know what you... Nathaniel told me everything before he died, Charlotte interrupted quietly, about his real identity as Nathan Sinclair, about the tunnel collapse that killed 37 men, about your warnings that were ignored. Thomas? Grant seemed to age a decade before her eyes, his shoulders sagging as if a great weight had settled upon them. He swore he would tell no one, he whispered. He was dying. He needed someone to continue his work, to protect you, and eventually bring those responsible to justice. Charlotte moved toward him, keeping her voice low. I've seen the evidence in the safe. I know about your family in Sacramento. Grant sank into a chair, removing his spectacles to pinch the bridge of his nose. Then you understand why I cannot. Come forward. They nearly killed me once. They would not hesitate to eliminate my wife and daughter if they discovered they were alive. I understand completely, Charlotte assured him, taking the seat opposite. I have no intention of exposing you, but I need to understand exactly what we're facing. You worked for Central Pacific. Nathan's father and his associates deliberately ignored your warnings about unsafe conditions to save money, resulting in 37 deaths. Is that accurate? Grant nodded grimly. I inspected that tunnel 3 weeks before the collapse. The support structures were inadequate, and there were clear signs of instability in the surrounding rock. I filed reports, sent telegrams directly to the board in Boston. The response came from Edward Sinclair himself. Proceed as planned. My concerns were noted but deemed exaggerated. And after the collapse, I was fired for incompetence the day they pulled the last body from the rubble. When I threatened to take my documentation to the newspapers, 2 men cornered me behind my boarding house. They beat me unconscious, broke both my hands. He held up his slightly misshapen fingers. A doctor passing by intervened, likely saving my life. Before they left, they told me exactly where my wife taught school and which route my daughter took home each day. Charlotte felt a wave of nausea at the calculated cruelty. So you disappeared. I wrote to my wife, telling her only that I was in danger and they needed to flee immediately. I emptied our savings account, Sent the money with instructions to disappear, to tell everyone I had died in the collapse. His voice cracked. I haven't seen them in 5 years. We exchange letters through an intermediary in San Francisco, a Chinese merchant who asks no questions. They live simply in Sacramento. My wife teaches at a small school under her maiden name. And Nathaniel, found you. Grant's expression softened slightly. 2 years after the collapse, I was working as a bookkeeper in Denver under yet another name. He approached me cautiously, revealed his true identity, showed me the evidence he had gathered. It took months before I trusted him enough to share what I knew. Charlotte leaned forward. And you came to Silver Creek at his invitation? He offered protection, a good salary, and the promise that someday we would expose the truth. He established the mine legitimately, but it was always a means to an end, funding his investigation, providing cover for his true purpose. Grant replaced his spectacles. He was a good man, Mrs. Sullivan. Better than his father ever was. I believe that, Charlotte said sincerely. Now tell me about Western Mining Consortium. Are they connected to the Sinclair interests? Grant's head snapped up. Where did you hear that name? Their representative attended the funeral. James Holloway. He mentioned they had been discussing a partnership with Nathaniel. That's impossible, Grant said firmly. Nathaniel would never do business with them. Western Mining is a subsidiary of Atlantic and Pacific Holdings, a company controlled by Victor Blackwood, Edward Sinclair's closest associate and fellow board member. They've been trying to buy the Silver Crest mine for over a year. The pieces clicked together in Charlotte's mind. Not to operate it, but to control the man they knew as Nathaniel Sullivan, to keep an eye on him because they suspected who he really was. Exactly. Grant lowered his voice further. 3 months ago, Nathaniel received an anonymous note suggesting someone was investigating his past. He believed Blackwood might have hired Pinkerton detectives, and now they're circling again, approaching Samuel Tucker directly. Grant's expression darkened. Tucker is a good foreman, but motivated primarily by money. If they've made him an offer, Charlotte stood abruptly. We need to secure your position at the mine. If Tucker has been compromised, you could be vulnerable. What do you suggest? Charlotte paced the study, mind racing. We promote you. Effective immediately, you're no longer just the bookkeeper, but the mine's official business manager, reporting directly to me. Tucker continues to oversee the physical operations, but all financial decisions, all hiring and firing, go through you. Holloway and his associates won't like that, Grant warned. Precisely, Charlotte replied with grim satisfaction. It puts another layer of protection between them and the mine's operations, and it gives us a legitimate reason for you to spend more time here at Silver Crest, where I can better ensure your safety. For the first time, Grant's perpetually worried expression gave way to something approaching hope. You're remarkably strategic for someone thrown into this situation, Mrs. Sullivan. Charlotte thought of her years at the factory, navigating the politics of survival among desperate women competing for limited positions. I've had practice in difficult circumstances, Mr. Grant. Now let's review those accounts and make your promotion official. They spent the next 2 hours examining the mine's financial records, which were impressively organized. The Silver Crest mine was indeed profitable, though not extraordinarily so, producing enough high-quality silver to justify its operation, but not enough to attract undue attention from larger interests seeking prime properties. Nathaniel deliberately kept production moderate, Grant explained. We have richer veins we haven't tapped yet. He was more interested in sustainability than maximum profit. As they concluded their meeting, Charlotte wrote out an official notice of Grant's promotion, which she would announce to the miners the following day. One more thing, Mr. Grant. The key to that Chinese merchant in San Francisco, I want it. If something happens to you, I need to be able to contact your family. Grant hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. I'll write it down, but please understand, if these men discover they're alive, I would only use it in the most dire circumstances, Charlotte assured him, but someone besides you needs to know. After Grant departed, Charlotte returned to the turret room, watching as he made his way down the winding drive toward town. The rain had stopped, leaving the landscape glistening in the late afternoon light. She unlocked the safe and carefully studied Nathan's journals again, focusing on entries about Victor Blackwood, the man who had apparently been his father's closest business associate on September 12, 1877. Blackwood was always more ruthless than father. When the telegram came about the tunnel collapse, it was Blackwood who immediately strategized damage control, calculating compensation that would prevent lawsuits without admitting liability. I remember his exact words, 37 dead. That's regrettable, but we've lost far more in previous accidents, as if men's lives could be measured against machinery. A soft knock at the bedroom door interrupted her reading. Charlotte quickly returned the journal to the safe, locked it, and descended the spiral staircase to find Martha looking uncharacteristically agitated. "There's a visitor, Ma'am, Mr. Alexander Reed from Boston. He says he represents Sinclair Investment Trust and wishes to express condolences on behalf of their board of directors." Charlotte felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. Sinclair Investment Trust, Nathan's family company. Did he say how he learned of Nathaniel's death? He mentioned seeing a notice in a Denver newspaper, said he was in Colorado on business and felt obligated to pay respects, as Mr. Sullivan had once done business with their firm. A blatant lie, unless doing business included fleeing from their murderous intentions. This was precisely the danger. Nathan had warned about someone from Boston investigating his death, perhaps seeking confirmation that Nathan Sinclair and Nathaniel Sullivan were indeed the same person. "Show him to the parlor," Charlotte instructed, forcing calm into her voice. "Offer refreshments. I'll be down shortly." Once alone, Charlotte moved quickly to her bedroom, analyzing her options. She could refuse to see Reed, but that might only increase his suspicion. Better to meet him, assess the threat, and mislead him if possible. She checked her appearance in the mirror, ensuring her morning attire was appropriately somber yet dignified. The woman who gazed back was composed, serious. Every inch the wealthy widow. No trace remained of the factory worker from Philadelphia who had arrived just 3 days ago. Alexander Reed proved to be younger than Charlotte had expected, perhaps 35, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of considerable wealth. His handsome features were arranged in an expression of practiced sympathy as he rose to greet her. "Mrs. Sullivan, please accept my sincere condolences on your loss. Alexander Reed, Sinclair Investment Trust." He extended a manicured hand. Charlotte allowed him to clasp her fingers briefly. "You're very kind to call, Mr. Reed, though I confess I'm unaware of any business relationship between my husband and your firm." Reed smiled smoothly. "It was some years ago, shortly after Mr. Sullivan established himself in Silver Creek. A small investment matter, nothing significant, but Edward Sinclair, our chairman, makes a point of acknowledging the passing of anyone connected to the firm, however tangentially." "How considerate," Charlotte replied, gesturing for him to be seated, while she took a chair opposite. "Though I'm surprised news of my husband's death reached Boston so quickly. The mining community is surprisingly close-knit, despite the distances involved," Reed explained. "Word travels fast when someone of Mr. Sullivan's stature passes unexpectedly." Martha entered with a tea tray, which she set on the table between them before withdrawing silently. "I understand you were only recently married," Reed continued as Charlotte poured the tea. "A tragic circumstance to be widowed so soon after your arrival." "Indeed," Charlotte handed him a cup, "though I'm grateful I arrived in time for us to exchange vows before his condition worsened. Small comfort, but significant nonetheless. The lie flowed easily, establishing the narrative that protected her legal position. Reed's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, and Charlotte wondered what information he already possessed about the timing of her arrival. "I've heard that Mr. Sullivan was somewhat reserved about his background before coming to Silver Creek," Reed remarked casually. "Quite the mysterious figure by some accounts." Charlotte added a precise amount of sugar to her tea. "My husband valued his privacy, Mr. Reed. He believed a man should be judged by his present actions, not his origins." "A commendable philosophy," Reed agreed, "though sometimes the past has a way of illuminating the present. Wouldn't you agree?" The conversation continued in this vein, Reed probing subtly about Nathaniel's history, Charlotte deflecting with practiced composure. Finally, Reed set down his teacup and retrieved a small leather portfolio from his jacket. "Mrs. Sullivan, I hope you won't think this presumptuous, but I've taken the liberty of preparing an offer for the Silvercrest mine on behalf of Sinclair Investment Trust. We would be interested in acquiring the property at a very generous price." Charlotte accepted the document with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How unexpected, Mr. Reed, especially given that my husband is barely cold in his grave." Reed had the grace to look momentarily discomfited. "Business often moves forward, despite personal tragedy, Mrs. Sullivan. The offer is quite substantial, enough to allow you to return east in considerable comfort if you wished. And if I don't wish to sell, then the offer remains open. Though I should mention that running a silver mine is a complex undertaking, particularly for someone unfamiliar with the industry. There are risks involved." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them. Charlotte maintained her composed expression while anger flared within her. This man represented the interests that had caused 37 deaths and were prepared to cause more to protect their reputations and fortunes. "I'll consider your offer, Mr. Reed," she said smoothly, setting the unopened document aside. "Now, if you'll excuse me, this has been an exhausting day." Reed stood, recognizing the dismissal. "Of course. I'm staying at the Silver Creek Hotel for the next few days, should you wish to discuss the matter further." He retrieved a calling card from his waistcoat pocket and placed it beside the offer. "I do hope you'll give it serious consideration, Mrs. Sullivan. It would be a shame if unfortunate circumstances befell the mine under your stewardship." After he departed, Charlotte remained seated, her mind racing. Reed's visit confirmed her worst fears. Nathan's true identity had been discovered, or at least suspected. Sinclair Investment Trust's sudden interest in an unremarkable Colorado silver mine could have no other explanation. Martha appeared in the doorway. "That man," she said with uncharacteristic vehemence, "has the eyes of a snake and the venom." "To match," Charlotte agreed, picking up Reed's offer and breaking the seal. The amount was indeed substantial, far more than the mine was worth based on its reported output. This wasn't a business proposition. It was a bribe to silence any potential revelations about the Sinclair family's involvement in the tunnel disaster. As darkness fell over Silver Creek, Charlotte stood at the window, watching the lamps being lit in the town below. Somewhere down there, Thomas Grant was carefully guarding his secrets, living in perpetual fear for his family's safety. And now Alexander Reed had arrived from Boston, representing the very interests that had already demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their reputations. The game had begun in earnest, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Charlotte fingered the key in her pocket, the key to Nathan's safe, to his secrets, to the evidence that could bring down powerful men. She had never sought this responsibility, but having accepted it, she would see it through, whatever the cost. Tomorrow she would visit the mine, announce Grant's promotion, and assess Samuel Tucker's loyalties. She would begin implementing the plans forming in her mind, plans to protect Grant, secure the evidence, and ultimately expose the truth about the tunnel collapse. Alexander Reed and his associates had no idea whom they were dealing with. They saw only a vulnerable widow, easily intimidated and manipulated. They would learn their mistake soon enough. Charlotte Harrington had disappeared the moment she stepped off that train. In her place stood Mrs. Nathaniel Sullivan, a woman with resources, determination, and a cause worth fighting for. The confrontation had begun, and she intended to win. The Silvercrest mine sprawled across the mountainside like a complex living organism, wooden structures housing machinery, narrow-gauge rail tracks for ore carts, and the dark mouth of the main shaft disappearing into the earth. Men moved with purpose, their faces and clothes streaked with dust and sweat as they emerged from the depths or prepared to descend. Charlotte surveyed the operation from horseback, having ridden out at dawn with Timothy Green and 2 mine guards, that Martha had surprisingly insisted accompany them. The mountain trails can be treacherous for those unfamiliar with them, the housekeeper had said, though her meaningful glance suggested the danger might not come from nature alone. Samuel Tucker emerged from a small office building, wiping his hands on a rag as he approached. His expression revealed nothing when Charlotte announced Green's promotion to business manager, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. Effective immediately, Mr. Green will oversee all financial operations and personnel decisions, Charlotte concluded. You'll continue to manage the technical aspects of mining, Mr. Tucker, reporting to Mr. Green on operational matters and to me regarding any significant developments. Tucker's eyes flicked to Green, then back to Charlotte. As you wish, Mrs. Sullivan, though I'm surprised by the timing. Mr. Sullivan always handled business matters directly with me. My husband valued Mr. Green's financial expertise, Charlotte replied smoothly. As do I. Times of transition require clear chains of authority. After discussing production goals and scheduling an inspection of the main shaft for later that week, Charlotte and Green rode a short distance away from the mine to speak privately, ostensibly reviewing property boundaries. Tucker wasn't pleased, Green observed, glancing back toward the mine entrance where the foreman stood watching them. No, but he accepted it, which suggests he hasn't been fully turned by Holloway's people, not yet at least. Charlotte adjusted her riding gloves. What's your assessment of the guards Martha arranged? Jenkins and Morales? They've worked for the mine since the beginning. Nathaniel hired them specifically for their military backgrounds. If trouble comes, they're reliable. Charlotte nodded, somewhat reassured. I need you to compile complete personnel records for every mine employee. Who hired them, how long they've worked here, any connections to outside interests. You suspect infiltration. I suspect we should trust no one completely, except perhaps Martha. Charlotte lowered her voice further. Reed's appearance changes everything. If Sinclair Investment Trust has traced Nathaniel here, they'll stop at nothing to bury the evidence against them, and me along with it, Green added grimly. Which is why you'll move into Silvercrest tomorrow, Charlotte decided. The East Wing has separate quarters originally intended for guests. You'll be safer there than in town. Green looked alarmed. Won't that seem unusual? The mine's bookkeeper, even the business manager, living in the owner's home. Not when everyone understands you're assisting the widow with complex business affairs during her time of grief, Charlotte replied. It's a perfectly reasonable arrangement. As they rode back toward town, Charlotte outlined additional security measures, changing the locks at Silvercrest, hiring more guards for the mine, establishing regular communication protocols so she would be immediately notified if Green failed. To appear when expected, they parted at the edge of town, Green heading to his boarding house to collect his belongings while Charlotte continued to Silvercrest. As she approached the gates, she noticed a carriage parked in the circular drive, an ancient, elegant black brougham she didn't recognize. Martha met her at the door, her expression tense. You have a visitor, Mrs. Sullivan. A Mr. Lawrence Cooper and his daughter from San Francisco. He claims to be an old friend of Nathaniel's. Charlotte felt a chill of apprehension. Another friend from the past she knew nothing about. How long have they been waiting? Nearly an hour. I've served refreshments in the parlor. Description: distinguished gentleman, perhaps 55. The daughter is young, early 20s, well-dressed, clearly wealthy. He seemed genuinely distressed. To learn of Nathaniel's passing, Charlotte removed her riding gloves and hat, quickly checking her appearance in the hall mirror. I'll see them now. Lawrence Cooper rose as Charlotte entered the parlor, a tall man with silver streaks, dark hair, and a neatly trimmed beard. His daughter remained seated, a slender young woman with striking features and intelligent eyes. Mrs. Sullivan, Cooper said, stepping forward to take Charlotte's hand. Please accept our condolences. I'm Lawrence Cooper, and this is my daughter, Elizabeth. We were deeply saddened to learn of Nathaniel's passing. Thank you for your kind words, Mr. Cooper, Charlotte replied, studying him closely. I must confess, Nathaniel never mentioned you. Something flickered in Cooper's eyes. Surprise. Perhaps, or concern? That's unexpected. We've known each other for many years, though our communication has been primarily through correspondence recently. He hesitated, glancing at his daughter. Perhaps we might speak privately? Elizabeth Cooper rose gracefully. I'll wait in the carriage, Father. After she departed, Cooper's demeanor changed subtly. Mrs. Sullivan, may I call you Charlotte? I understand you were married only briefly before Nathaniel's passing. You understand correctly, Charlotte replied cautiously. How exactly did you know my husband, Mr. Cooper? Cooper moved to check that the parlor door was fully closed before answering. I didn't know Nathaniel Sullivan at all, he said quietly. I knew Nathan Sinclair. We were at Harvard together. Charlotte managed to keep her expression neutral despite her racing heart. I'm afraid you're mistaken, Mr. Cooper. My husband was Nathaniel Sullivan, a mining entrepreneur from nowhere that can be verified, Cooper interrupted gently. Because he created that identity 5 years ago when he fled Boston. They regarded each other in tense silence, Charlotte calculating her response. This man either represented a new threat or an unexpected ally. Why are you here, Mr. Cooper? Because Nathaniel, wrote to me 3 months ago suggesting he might have been discovered. He asked me to check certain investment patterns, movements of specific individuals connected to his father's company. Cooper's expression grew grave. What I found concerned me deeply. Sinclair Investment Trust has been quietly acquiring properties throughout Colorado, particularly those connected to former Central Pacific Railroad employees. Former employees like Timothy Green, Charlotte said, testing him. Cooper's eyes widened slightly. So you do know. Thank God. He seemed to relax marginally. Yes, like Green. Or should I say Thomas Grant? How do you fit into this, Mr. Cooper? What was your relationship with Nathan Sinclair? I was his professor at Harvard, then his friend, and eventually his confidant. When he discovered his father's involvement in the tunnel disaster cover-up, I was the first person he approached. Cooper paced the room, hands clasped behind his back. I've been helping him gather evidence against Edward Sinclair and Victor Blackwood for years, using my banking connections to trace financial transactions, document patterns of corruption. Why should I believe you? Cooper reached into his coat and withdrew a letter, which he handed to Charlotte. Nathan wrote this shortly before his death, I imagine. It arrived in San Francisco just days ago. The letter was brief, written in the same hand Charlotte recognized from Nathan's journals. Lawrence, if you are reading this, events have likely taken their predicted course. My illness progresses rapidly, and I do not expect to see the spring. Miss Charlotte Harrington arrives from Philadelphia next week to be my bride. Should the worst occur before we can be properly married, I have arranged for her to inherit everything, including our shared burden of truth. She knows nothing of this yet, but I believe she possesses the strength of character to continue what we began. If possible, offer her your guidance as you have offered me your friendship these many years. The wolves circle closer. Reed has been seen in Denver. We must assume my identity has been compromised. With deepest gratitude, Nathan Charlotte studied the letter carefully, noting details that would be difficult to falsify. Nathan's distinctive handwriting, references to her arrival date, mention of Alexander Reed. "You're taking a significant risk coming here," she observed, returning the letter. "If what you say is true, associating with Nathan Sinclair or his widow could be dangerous. Hence the pretense of old friendship and bringing my daughter as cover. Elizabeth knows nothing of this, by the way. She believes we're making a social call while in Colorado for legitimate business." Cooper's expression softened. "Nathan spoke highly of you in his letters these past months. Said you reminded him of his mother, principled, practical, unafraid to stand for what's right." The comparison startled Charlotte. Nathan had known her only through correspondence, yet had apparently seen something in her letters that resonated deeply with him. "Mr. Cooper, I'm in a precarious position. I've been Nathan's widow for barely 5 days. Already I've received an offer for the mine from Sinclair Investment Trust, delivered by Alexander Reed himself, who is currently staying in Silver Creek." Cooper's face paled. "Reed is here? In town? Then we have less time than I thought." He moved closer, lowering his voice further. "Listen carefully. Reed isn't just Edward Sinclair's representative. He's his fixer, the man who handles inconvenient problems. If he's made an offer for the mine, it's merely a formality before more direct methods are employed. Are you suggesting he would resort to violence? I'm suggesting he already has, repeatedly. The accident that killed Nathan's driver in Boston. Reed arranged it. The men who attacked Thomas Grant, Reed hired them." Cooper's expression was deadly serious. "If he's here in Silver Creek, your life is in danger." Charlotte absorbed this information, mentally adjusting her plans. "Thomas Grant is moving into Silver Crest tomorrow for his protection. Perhaps you and your daughter should remain in town as well, at least overnight." Cooper shook his head. "We've taken rooms at the hotel in Silverton, the next town over. Less conspicuous that way, but I'll return tomorrow to discuss strategy." He retrieved his hat from the side table. "In the meantime, increase your security. Reed rarely acts directly, but he employs men who specialize in making murder appear accidental." After Cooper departed, Charlotte immediately summoned Martha and explained the new developments, omitting only Nathan's true identity, which she still hesitated to share even with the loyal housekeeper. "We'll need additional guards," Martha agreed. "I know several reliable men in town, veterans who worked for Mr. Sullivan occasionally when valuable shipments needed protection." "Hire them immediately," Charlotte instructed. And Martha, "No. One enters Silver Crest without being announced and identified, no matter their stated business." That evening, Charlotte dined alone in the formal dining room, the empty chairs a reminder of how quickly her circumstances had changed. Less than a week ago, she had been on a train heading west, anticipating marriage to a stranger. Now she was a widow, embroiled in a dangerous conspiracy, with powerful enemies closing in. She was halfway through her meal when a tremendous crash shattered the silence, the sound of breaking glass from somewhere upstairs. Charlotte froze, listening intently as footsteps pounded on the floor above, followed by a man's shout and another crash. Martha burst into the dining room, a shotgun in her hands. "Stay here," she ordered, face grim. "Jenkins is investigating." Charlotte ignored the instruction, following Martha into the hallway where they could hear the commotion more clearly. A gunshot echoed from the second floor, followed by the sound of running feet and breaking glass. Jenkins appeared at the top of the stairs, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "Intruder," he gasped, "came through the window in the east bedroom, shot at me and fled the same way." "Are you badly hurt?" Charlotte asked, already moving up the stairs. "Just a graze from flying glass," Jenkins assured her, pressing a handkerchief to his head. "I got a shot off, but I don't think I hit him." The east bedroom, the one directly below the turret room with its hidden safe. Charlotte felt cold dread wash over her as she realized the implications. Someone had been trying to access Nathan's secret documents. The bedroom was in disarray, curtains torn from the window, furniture overturned, glass from the broken window scattered across the floor. Most disturbing was the hole in the ceiling, a sartushai, crude opening that had been cut into the plaster, providing access to the floor of the turret room above. "They knew exactly what they were looking for," Martha observed grimly, examining the damage. "The safe in the turret." Charlotte looked at her sharply. "You knew about the safe?" Martha met her gaze steadily. "I've been with Nathaniel since he arrived in Silver Creek. I know more than you might imagine, Mrs. Sullivan." Before Charlotte could respond, Morales appeared in the doorway. "We found blood on the ground beneath the window. Whoever it was..." Jenkins' shot caught him. "We're following the trail now." "Be careful," Charlotte warned. "There may be more than one." After Morales departed, Charlotte and Martha secured the damaged window as best they could, moving a heavy dresser in front of it for additional protection. "You should sleep in the West Wing tonight," Martha suggested. "We'll post guards at all entrances." Charlotte shook her head. "No, I need to check the safe first." In the turret room, she found everything apparently undisturbed. The painting concealing the safe remained in place, and when she swung it aside, the safe door was still, securely locked. Relief washed over her, tempered by the realization that whoever had broken in knew exactly what they were seeking. "We need to move the documents," Charlotte decided. "The safe is too obvious a hiding place now." "There's a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards in Nathaniel's dressing room," Martha said. "He used it for valuables when traveling." Charlotte glanced at her speculatively. "You really did know him well." "Well enough to know he wasn't born Nathaniel Sullivan," Martha replied quietly, "though his secrets remained his own." This confirmed what Charlotte had begun to suspect, that Martha knew, or at least suspected, Nathan's true identity. "Help me move these papers," she said, opening the safe and carefully removing its contents. Together, they transferred the journals, documents, and wooden box to the hiding place Martha had described. A clever compartment built into the floor, completely invisible when the rug was replaced. "I suggest we both sleep in the kitchen tonight," Martha said when they had finished. "It's easier to secure, with only one entrance and barred windows." Charlotte agreed, and they spent an uncomfortable night on makeshift pallets near the kitchen. Stove, the shotgun within Martha's reach, a revolver beside Charlotte's pillow. Jenkins and another guard patrolled the grounds, but no further disturbance occurred. Dawn brought news. The blood trail had led to the edge of the property before disappearing, suggesting the intruder had a horse waiting. More ominously, a search of the surrounding area revealed fresh cigarette butts on a ridge overlooking Silver Crest. Someone had been watching the house, perhaps for days. Charlotte called an emergency meeting in the kitchen with Martha, the guards, and Timothy Green, who arrived as planned to take up residence in the East Wing. "The situation has escalated faster than anticipated," Charlotte began, pouring coffee for everyone with her own hands, a gesture that seemed to surprise the men but felt appropriate for the crisis they faced. "Last night's break-in confirms that our enemies know exactly what they're looking for. The East Wing is compromised," Green observed nervously. "Perhaps I should remain in town after all." "Absolutely not," Charlotte replied firmly. "You're safer here where we can protect you. You'll take the room adjacent to mine in the West Wing instead." Jenkins cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Sullivan, but we're outnumbered. 4 of us can't secure this entire property, especially with you and Mr. Green both as potential targets. Then we increase our numbers, Charlotte decided. Martha, how quickly can you arrange for those additional men you mentioned? By nightfall, if I leave for town immediately. Good. And Mr. Green, I believe it's time we involve Mr. Cooper more directly. His experience and connections could prove invaluable. Green looked confused. Cooper? A friend of my husband's from Harvard. He arrived yesterday with information about Alexander Reed and Sinclair Investment Trust. Charlotte turned to Jenkins. I want the grounds patrolled in pairs from now on, no one alone at any time. And we need to establish a secure method of communication with the mine. If Reed makes a move there, we need to know immediately. As the others dispersed to their assigned tasks, Charlotte felt a strange calm settle over her. The danger was real and immediate, yet instead of paralyzing her with fear, it had focused her mind with remarkable clarity. She retreated to the study to draft a letter to Lawrence Cooper, requesting his immediate assistance and outlining the events of the previous night. As she wrote, a plan began to form, not just for protecting themselves and the evidence, but for setting a trap that might expose Reed and his employers. A knock at the study door interrupted her thoughts. Martha entered, ready to depart for town. Before you go, Charlotte said, there's something I need to know. How much did Nathaniel tell you about his past? Martha hesitated, then closed the door behind her. He never confirmed his true identity, if that's what you're asking. But I'm not blind, Mrs. Sullivan. The nightmares he had, the way he reacted to news from Boston, his obsession with the tunnel disaster. I pieced together enough. And you stayed, despite the danger. My husband and I owed him our lives, Martha said simply. When typhoid took our son, we were destroyed. Frank started drinking. I couldn't get out of bed for weeks. We were about to lose everything when Nathaniel appeared, offering Frank work as his attorney, me as his housekeeper. He saved us. Her weathered face softened with the memory. Whatever secrets he carried, whatever dangers followed him, we were loyal to him, as we are now loyal to you. The unexpected depth of Martha's devotion moved Charlotte deeply. Thank you for telling me this. It means more than you know. After Martha departed, Charlotte completed her letter to Cooper and prepared to visit the mine. The break-in had accelerated her timeline. They needed to consolidate their position and resources before Reed made his next move. As she rode toward the mine, flanked by guards, Charlotte reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in less than a week. She had come to Colorado, seeking security through marriage, a practical arrangement with a stranger. Instead, she had found purpose, not in being a wife, but in pursuing justice for 37 dead men and their families. For the first time in her life, Charlotte felt truly alive, all her faculties engaged in a cause larger than mere survival. The danger was real, the odds against them substantial, but she had resources Nathan's enemies didn't anticipate. The element of surprise in her unexpected competence, allies like Martha whose loyalty ran bone deep, and most importantly, a righteous anger that would not be easily extinguished. Samuel Tucker was waiting when she arrived at the mine, his manner strangely subdued. Mrs. Sullivan, he greeted her, there's been a development you should know about. What kind of development? Tucker glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. A man approached me in town last night, offered a substantial sum for information about the mine's operations, specifically about Timothy Green's role here. Charlotte maintained her composure with effort. And what did you tell this man? Nothing yet, Tucker replied, meeting her gaze directly. I told him I'd consider his offer, but I thought you should know first. Why, tell me, the money must be tempting. Tucker looked toward the mine entrance, where men were emerging from the morning shift, dusty and tired. My father died in a mine collapse back in Pennsylvania. The company called it an accident, but everyone knew they'd ignored safety concerns. For months, his jaw tightened. I've been suspicious about Mr. Sullivan's interest in tunnel collapses and railroad accidents for years. The questions he asked, the newspaper clippings he collected. He turned back to Charlotte. I don't know exactly what's happening here, Mrs. Sullivan, but I recognize the smell of a cover-up, and I know which side I want to be on. Charlotte studied him, weighing his sincerity against the possibility of deception. Finally, she made a decision. The man who approached you, was it Alexander Reed? Tucker's surprise was answer enough. How did you know? Mr. Reed represents interests that would prefer certain truths remain buried, Charlotte said carefully. I would consider it a personal favor if you would appear to accept his offer. Feed him information, real enough to be believable, false, enough to be useless. Understanding dawned in Tucker's eyes. You want me to play double agent. I want you to help me protect Timothy Green and expose those who would threaten him, Charlotte corrected. Can I count on you? Tucker extended his hand. You can, Mrs. Sullivan, and I'll do you one better. I know exactly which men at the mine are loyal beyond question. We'll build you a small army if needed. As they shook hands, Charlotte felt the balance shifting, momentum gathering, one by one. She was securing allies, building a network of protection around the evidence and witnesses that could bring down the Sinclair empire. Now it was time to spring the trap for Alexander Reed, to transform from hunted to hunter in a dangerous game where lives hung in the balance. The crisis had found her, but the turning point would be of her own making. Charlotte Harrington had arrived in Silver Creek as a mail-order bride seeking security. Mrs. Nathaniel Sullivan would remain as an instrument of justice, wielding wealth and position as weapons in a battle that had claimed too many victims already. The transformation was complete, and there was no turning back. Silver Creek transformed under the first significant snowfall of the season, a pristine blanket of white that softened the harsh lines of the mining town and muffled sounds to a whisper. From the windows of Silver Crest, Charlotte watched the snowflakes swirl against the darkening sky, creating an illusion of peace that belied the tension permeating the household. 2 weeks had passed since the break-in attempt. 2 weeks of vigilance, strategy, and careful maneuvering in a dangerous game where the stakes were human lives. Silver Crest now resembled a fortress more than a mansion. Guards patrolling the grounds in rotating shifts, windows reinforced, doors secured with additional locks. The men are in position, Lawrence Cooper reported, joining Charlotte at the window. He had moved into Silver Crest 3 days after the break-in, ostensibly as a business consultant helping the widow manage her affairs. His daughter Elizabeth remained in Silverton, believing her father was simply assisting an old friend's widow while conducting his own banking business in the region. And Tucker has arranged everything at the mine? Charlotte asked. Cooper nodded. The false documents are in Green's office, exactly where Reed's informant will report finding them. The real evidence remains secure. He studied Charlotte's profile, illuminated by the fading daylight. You seem remarkably calm for someone about to spring a trap on Alexander Reed. I've discovered an unexpected talent for strategy, Charlotte replied with a slight smile. Growing up in a Philadelphia tenement teaches one to anticipate threats and plan accordingly. Nathan would be impressed, Cooper observed. He always believed the privileged classes underestimated those they considered beneath them. It was one of his core principles that true character reveals itself regardless of circumstance. Charlotte had come to appreciate Cooper's insights into Nathan Sinclair. Through his stories and recollections, she had developed a deeper understanding of the man whose identity she had inherited. His brilliance at Harvard, his growing disillusionment with his father's business ethics, his determination to expose corruption regardless of personal cost. The storm should help our cause, Charlotte noted as the snowfall intensified. Reed's men will have difficulty approaching undetected in fresh snow. Unless they're already in position, Cooper cautioned. They aren't, Charlotte assured him. Samuel's men have been monitoring the property boundaries since dawn. No one has crossed our perimeter. Martha appeared in the doorway, her expression grave. Mr. Green has arrived with news from town. You'll want to hear this immediately. Timothy Green entered, removing his snow-dusted hat and coat. His perpetually worried expression had deepened into genuine alarm. Reed is mobilizing, he reported without preamble. His men were observed purchasing supplies at the general store. Provisions. For several days, ammunition, cold weather gear. How many men? Cooper asked sharply. At least 6, possibly more, arriving on the afternoon train, according to the station master. Green ran a hand through his thinning hair, a nervous gesture Charlotte had come to recognize. They're not being particularly subtle about it either. It's as if Reed wants us to know they're coming. Or he's grown impatient, Charlotte suggested. The mine is still operating, his buyout offer remains unanswered, and his attempt to access the safe failed. He may have decided that subtlety is no longer effective. We should consider evacuation, Cooper said, concern evident in his voice. 6 armed men or more. That's not a break-in attempt, that's an assault force. Charlotte shook her head firmly. We anticipated this escalation. Our defenses are in place, the evidence is secure, and more importantly, we've laid the groundwork for our counterattack. She turned to Green. Did you mail the letters as instructed? This morning, he confirmed. 1 to the Denver newspaper, 1 to the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver, and 1 to Judge Wilson here in Silver Creek, all to be opened in 3 days if they don't receive a telegraph from you, countermanding the instruction. Charlotte nodded with satisfaction. The letters contained detailed accusations against Sinclair Investment Trust and Western Mining Consortium, along with enough evidence to prompt official investigations, a fail-safe in case their plan went awry. What about the witness statements? Cooper asked. Are they included? Only references to their existence and secure location, Charlotte replied. If something happens to us, the letters will direct authorities to where they can find Thomas Grant's full testimony and the supporting documentation. Martha entered with a tray of coffee. Samuel Tucker has arrived, she announced. He's in the kitchen warming up. Tucker joined them moments later, snow melting from his beard, his massive frame seeming to fill the room. Reed's making his move tonight, he reported without preamble. One of his men got drunk at the saloon and boasted about collecting overdue payment from the Sullivan widow. Did he specify what kind of payment? Charlotte asked. Just that Reed was tired of waiting and had decided that more direct negotiations were required. Tucker's expression hardened. I've brought 10 men with me, all armed, all loyal. They're positioning themselves around the property now, using the storm as cover. Charlotte moved to the large desk, where a map of Silver Crest and its grounds had been laid out. We need to adjust our defensive positions. With the snowfall, they're more likely to approach from the south slope, where the trees provide cover almost to the house. For the next hour, they refined their strategy, assigning men to key positions, establishing signals, and preparing for multiple scenarios. As darkness fell completely, the mansion grew quiet, tension hanging in the air like the static before. A lightning strike. You should rest, Cooper suggested to Charlotte around 9 o'clock. We have enough men on watch. Nothing will happen before midnight at the earliest, not in this weather. Charlotte reluctantly agreed. The past 2 weeks had been exhausting, managing the mine, coordinating their defensive preparations, and maintaining the public facade of a grieving widow attempting to settle her husband's affairs. Sleep had been elusive, snatched in brief, intervals between crises. She retired to her bedroom, but found sleep impossible. Instead, she sat at the small writing desk, penning a letter to her sister in Pittsburgh, a letter that might serve as farewell if the night's events went poorly. My dearest Margaret, I write to you from circumstances so extraordinary that you might scarcely believe them true. The husband I travelled west to marry died within hours of my arrival, but not before entrusting me with his fortune and a mission of profound importance. Should you receive this letter, it means I have not survived. To tell you this story in person, I want you to know that I found purpose here in Silver Creek, a cause worth fighting for, and if necessary, dying for. The timid sister you remember has discovered reservoirs of courage she never knew existed. I have made provisions for you and the children. Mr. Franklin Reynolds of Silver Creek has instructions regarding funds set aside for your family. It is a small compensation for the loss of the sister who always admired your strength and kindness. A soft knock interrupted her writing. Martha entered at Charlotte's acknowledgement, carrying a small wooden box. "I thought you might want this," the housekeeper said, placing the box on the desk. "It belonged to Nathaniel's mother," he told me once. "He kept it with his most personal possessions." The box was finely crafted, inlaid with mother-of-pearl in an intricate pattern. Inside, Charlotte found a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "He mentioned once that he planned to give it to his bride," Martha continued. "I think he would want you to have it now." Charlotte was touched by the gesture. Though her marriage to Nathaniel had been a fiction, his bequest to her had been real, as was her commitment to the cause that had cost him his life. She opened the locket to find a miniature painted portrait of a woman with kind eyes and a serene expression. "His mother," Martha confirmed, "Eleanor Sinclair, though he never used that name when speaking of her to me." "You knew," Charlotte said softly. "You knew who he really was all along." Martha's weathered face revealed nothing. "I knew he was a good man, running from a terrible truth. The name he used mattered less than the heart he showed." She moved to the window, checking that the shutters were secure. "The storm is worsening. It may delay Reed's men, but it will also make it harder for the marshal to reach us if we manage to signal for help." "We're on our own tonight," Charlotte agreed, fastening the locket around her neck, as perhaps Nathan was for much of his life. A sudden commotion from downstairs interrupted their conversation. Raised voices, heavy footsteps. Martha tensed, reaching for the revolver she now carried constantly, but relaxed slightly when Cooper's voice called up the stairs. "Charlotte! Martha! Come quickly! It's Elizabeth!" They hurried downstairs to find Cooper in the entrance hall, supporting his daughter who was soaked from the snow, her elegant traveling dress sodden and torn, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. "Elizabeth insisted on traveling from Silverton despite the storm," Cooper explained, as Martha helped the young woman to a chair near the fire. "She arrived in Silver Creek only to find men watching the hotel, asking questions about any young women traveling alone. Reed's men," Charlotte surmised. "They must suspect a connection between you and Cooper." Elizabeth looked up sharply. "The hotel clerk warned me, said they'd been showing my description around town, claiming to be relatives concerned for my welfare." Her voice, despite her bedraggled appearance, was steady. "I hired a sleigh to bring me as close to Silvercrest as possible, then walked the last half-mile through the woods to avoid the main road." "You could have frozen to death," her father admonished, though concern rather than anger colored his tone. "I think that was their intention if they caught me," Elizabeth replied grimly. "Father, these men aren't looking for a social visit. The driver who brought me overheard them in the saloon. They're planning to burn Silvercrest to the ground tonight, with everyone inside." The information landed like a physical blow. Charlotte had anticipated threats, perhaps an armed confrontation, but not complete destruction of the property and everyone within it. "They're growing desperate," Cooper observed. "Reed must have received new instructions from Boston, or he's decided to eliminate all potential threats in one operation." Charlotte countered. The house, the evidence, the witnesses, all reduced to ashes with a plausible explanation of a tragic accident during a snowstorm. Tucker, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. We need to change our strategy. Defense isn't enough now. We need to take the fight to them before they reach the house. Agreed, Charlotte said decisively. Martha, take Elizabeth upstairs and find her dry clothes. Mr. Cooper, gather every lamp and lantern in the house. We'll need light to see them coming through the storm. She turned to Tucker. How many men can you position along the south approach? 5, maybe 6 without thinning our defenses elsewhere. Do it, Charlotte instructed, and send someone to the mine immediately. We need every man you trust. As the others dispersed to their tasks, Green approached Charlotte, his nervousness even more pronounced than usual. Mrs. Sullivan, perhaps we should consider Cooper's earlier suggestion of evacuation. We could take the evidence, escape through the North Woods to Silverton. And then what? Charlotte asked. Keep running? Live in fear? No, Mr. Green. Nathan Sinclair spent 5 years hiding from these men. I won't spend the rest of my life doing the same. Her voice softened slightly. But I understand if you wish to leave. Your safety was always our primary concern. Green straightened, a flash of unexpected dignity crossing his worried features. My family believes I died to protect them. What kind of man would I be if I fled now, leaving others to fight my battle? He squared his shoulders. I'll stay, Mrs. Sullivan, whatever comes. Within the hour, Silvercrest had been transformed into a battle station. Lanterns were strategically placed to illuminate the grounds around the house. Every window and door on the ground floor had been secured and barricaded. The women, including Elizabeth Cooper, had been instructed in the use of firearms, though Charlotte had been practicing for days already under Tucker's guidance. From an upstairs window, Charlotte surveyed their preparations. The snow continued to fall heavily, reducing visibility to mere yards beyond the circle of lantern lights surrounding the house. The storm that had seemed an ally earlier now worked against them, potentially concealing Reed's men until they were dangerously close. You should know, Cooper said quietly, joining her at the window, that I've sent a message to a trusted colleague in Denver. If we survive this night, I believe we can arrange federal protection for Thomas Grant and his family. Enough to allow him to testify safely. Charlotte glanced at him. You think that's still possible after all this? I think Nathan's death needn't be in vain, Cooper replied. And I think you've accomplished more in 2 weeks than most could. Manage in years. Reed's desperation proves it. You've backed them into a corner. A sudden shout from outside interrupted their conversation, one of Tucker's men giving the alarm. Through the swirling snow, dark figures were visible moving among the trees at the edge of the cleared area surrounding the mansion. It's starting, Charlotte observed with eerie calm. Earlier than we expected. The storm's worsening, Cooper noted. They probably fear being trapped in town if they wait. Charlotte moved quickly to the central hall where the others had gathered. Martha, grim-faced and determined. Elizabeth Cooper, pale but composed. Thomas Grant, nervously checking and rechecking his revolver. And Franklin Reynolds, who had arrived an hour earlier to deliver news from town and elected to remain. Remember the plan, Charlotte instructed. No one engages unless absolutely necessary. Our goal is to hold them off until the mine workers arrive with reinforcements, or until morning, when the storm may break enough for us to signal for help from town. A rifle shot echoed from outside, followed by another. Tucker burst through the front door, snow coating his broad shoulders. They're approaching from multiple directions, he reported. At least 10 men, maybe more. They've split into groups. To surround the house, Charlotte concluded. Just as we anticipated. She turned to Reynolds. Are the documents secure? The hiding place you suggested, the lawyer confirmed. The flour barrel in the root cellar. No one would think to look there. Another volley of shots rang out, closer now. Tucker returned outside to coordinate their defenders, while the others took up their assigned positions throughout the house. Martha and Elizabeth in the kitchen with clear sightlines to the back. Doctor Reynolds and Green covering the front entrance. Cooper monitoring the east wing, where the intruder had previously attempted entry. Charlotte moved from position to position, rifle in hand, offering encouragement and adjusting their defense. As reports came in from Tucker's men outside, the attackers were probing their defenses, testing for weaknesses rather than mounting a full assault. Around midnight, the first direct attack came, 3 men rushing the kitchen door from the cover of the woodshed. Martha's shotgun roared, sending them scrambling back into the darkness. Minutes later, 2 more attempted to force a window in the east wing, only to be driven back by Cooper's accurate fire. The pattern continued for over an hour. Probe, retreat, probe again from a different direction. It was a siege strategy, designed to exhaust the defenders while conserving the attackers' strength. "They're wearing us down," Cooper observed during a momentary lull. "And we still haven't seen Reed himself." "He'll be directing operations from a safe distance," Charlotte replied. "Reed doesn't take personal risks if he can avoid them." As if summoned by their discussion, a voice called out from the darkness beyond the circle of lantern light. "Mrs. Sullivan, can you hear me?" Charlotte recognized Alexander Reed's cultured tones immediately. She moved cautiously to a window, staying to one side to avoid presenting a target. "I hear you, Mr. Reed." "This situation has become unnecessarily complicated," Reed called, his voice carrying clearly through the snowy night. "I'm authorized to double my previous offer for the mine. You can leave Colorado with a fortune, no questions asked. And if I refuse?" "A pause, then. I'm afraid the alternative becomes considerably less pleasant for everyone inside that house." Charlotte exchanged glances with Cooper, who nodded encouragingly. "I need to consider your offer, Mr. Reed. Perhaps we could discuss in person." Another pause, longer this time. "That seems reasonable. A temporary ceasefire while we negotiate. I'll approach the front door alone in 10 minutes. When Reed's voice faded, Cooper looked at Charlotte with concern. "You're not actually considering his offer?" "Of course not," Charlotte replied, "but his approach gives us an opportunity. If we can capture Reed himself, his men might stand down." The plan formed quickly. Tucker and 2 of his most trusted men would position themselves to intercept Reed. If he attempted any treachery, Charlotte would meet him in the parlor, stalling for time, while Cooper and Reynolds listened from the adjoining room, ready to intervene if necessary. Precisely 10 minutes later, a knock came at the front door. Charlotte nodded to Tucker, who opened it cautiously, revealing Alexander Reed standing alone in the swirling snow, seemingly unarmed. "Mrs. Sullivan," Reed greeted her with perfect composure, removing his hat as he entered. Snow dusted his expensive coat and clung to his polished boots. "Thank you for agreeing to this discussion." "The parlor will be more comfortable," Charlotte replied, leading the way while Tucker followed at a discreet distance. Once seated before the fire, Reed studied Charlotte with undisguised curiosity. "You're not at all what I expected," he observed. Nathaniel Sullivan's letters suggested a simple factory worker seeking security through marriage. Yet here you are, defending his property with remarkable determination. People often contain unexpected depths, Mr. Reed. Charlotte poured tea from the service Martha had prepared earlier, her hands steady despite the tension. Just as mining, companies sometimes harbor unexpected secrets. A flicker of something, wariness perhaps, crossed Reed's face before his smooth mask returned. "Let's speak plainly, Mrs. Sullivan. You've inherited certain materials that some interested parties would prefer to remain private. I'm authorized to compensate you generously for those materials and your discretion." "You mean Nathan Sinclair's evidence against his father and Victor Blackwood?" Charlotte said bluntly, watching Reed's reaction. The documentation of 37 deaths they could have prevented and then callously covered up. Reed's composure slipped momentarily, confirming her direct approach had caught him off guard. So you know the full story. That changes our negotiation somewhat. He leaned forward. Consider your position carefully, Mrs. Sullivan. You're a recent arrival in Colorado, with no connections, no history here. The word of a mail-order bride against some of the most respected businessmen in America, who do you imagine would prevail? In such a contest, perhaps Thomas Grant's testimony might tip the balance, Charlotte suggested, watching Reed's face pale slightly. Or perhaps Lawrence Cooper's banking expertise and social standing might lend credibility to the evidence. Reed's eyes narrowed. Cooper is here, in this house? Charlotte realized her tactical error immediately. She had revealed too much. Reed now knew that both key witnesses were present at Silver Crest. This conversation is clearly pointless, Reed said, rising abruptly. I had hoped to resolve this matter amicably, but you leave me no choice. There's always a choice, Mr. Reed, Charlotte replied, standing to face him. Justice for 37 dead men and their families, or continued protection of the wealthy? Criminals who sacrifice them for profit. An admirable sentiment, Reed sneered, but ultimately naive. Do you really believe... The rest of his statement was lost in a sudden commotion from outside. Shouts, then a series of gunshots much louder and more numerous than before. Tucker burst into the parlor, his expression triumphant. The reinforcements. From the mine have arrived, Mrs. Sullivan. Reed's men are surrounded. Relief washed over Charlotte, but her triumph was short-lived. Reed moved with unexpected speed, producing a small revolver from inside his coat and grabbing Charlotte, pressing the weapon to her temple. No one moves, he ordered as Cooper and Reynolds rushed in from the adjoining room. I'm leaving with Mrs. Sullivan. Anyone attempts to stop me, she dies instantly. The room froze in tableau. Reed holding Charlotte, the others watching helplessly. Outside, the gunfire had stopped, suggesting Reed's men had indeed been subdued or surrendered. This accomplishes nothing, Reed, Cooper said carefully. Even if you escape tonight, copies of all the evidence are already in the hands of authorities. In Denver, you're bluffing, Reed snarled, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Tell that to the U.S. Marshal, who should be arriving from Denver by tomorrow's train. Charlotte said calmly, despite the cold metal pressed against her skin. A telegraph requesting his presence was sent 3 days ago, along with a sealed packet of evidence. Charlotte could feel Reed's indecision, his plan collapsing around him, his men captured, his employers implicated in documents already beyond his reach. For a moment, she thought he might surrender, recognizing the futility of his position. Instead, he tightened his grip. We're walking out that door. Anyone follows, she dies. I'll release her once I'm safely away. No one present believed him. Once beyond Silvercrest, Charlotte would become a liability rather than a shield. Reed backed slowly toward the door, dragging Charlotte with him, his eyes darting between Cooper, Reynolds, and Tucker, calculating his odds. In that moment of distraction, Charlotte made her move. The self-defense technique Martha had insisted. She learned. With all her strength, she drove her heel down onto Reed's instep, while simultaneously jerking her elbow back into his solar plexus. His grip loosened momentarily, allowing her to twist away from the gun. Tucker lunged forward, tackling Reed to the ground as the revolver discharged harmlessly into the ceiling. Within seconds, Reed was subdued, disarmed, and restrained with leather belts from Cooper's and Reynolds' waists. Are you hurt? Cooper asked Charlotte, who was trembling with delayed shock. No, she managed, though her voice shook. What's happening outside? Tucker grinned broadly. Reed's men surrendered. As soon as they realized they were outnumbered, we've got them all under guard in the barn. As the realization of their victory settled over her, Charlotte sank into a chair, overcome by the night's events. They had done it, captured Reed, secured his men, protected the evidence and witnesses. The path to justice for the tunnel victims now stood open before them, clear of the obstacles that had claimed Nathan Sinclair's life. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but the desperate violence that had threatened Silvercrest had been quelled. Morning would bring the U.S. Marshal, formal arrests, and the beginning of legal proceedings that would send shockwaves through the financial establishments of Boston and beyond. Charlotte looked around at her unlikely allies, Martha standing vigilant in the doorway, Thomas Grant emerging cautiously from his defensive position, the Coopers supporting each other, Tucker and Reynolds securing Reed for transport to the town jail. Strangers just weeks ago, now bound together by shared purpose and survival. The locket at her throat seemed suddenly warmer, as if Nathan Sinclair's spirit somehow witnessed their triumph. The mail-order bride who had arrived to find her groom dying had fulfilled his final request beyond anything he might have imagined possible. As dawn approached, bringing the promise of justice long denied, Charlotte realized that in losing the future she had traveled west to find, she had discovered something far more valuable, not just purpose, but a form of family forged in crisis, bound by integrity rather than blood. The resolution was not yet complete, but the path forward was clear at last. Spring came to Silver Creek. In a riot of wildflowers that carpeted the valley, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the somber proceedings taking place in Denver. 4 months had passed since the night of the siege at Silver Crest. 4 months of testimony, evidence, gathering and legal maneuvering that had captivated newspaper readers across the nation. Charlotte stood at the window of her hotel suite, watching people bustling along Denver's busy streets. The trial of Victor Blackwood and the trustees of Sinclair Investment Trust had concluded the previous day, with the jury deliberating now on charges of criminal negligence, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice in connection with the tunnel collapse that had claimed 37 lives. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Lawrence Cooper, who entered with the morning newspapers. "Your front-page news again," he said, handing her the Denver Chronicle. The headline was satisfyingly bold. "Sinclair heir's widow delivers damning testimony against father's associates." "What does it say?" Charlotte asked, still uncomfortable. Seeing herself described in such public terms, Cooper scanned the article. "The usual dramatic account of your journey west to marry Nathan Sinclair, only to find him dying of pneumonia, whereupon he entrusted you with evidence of corporate malfeasance that his own father had tried to suppress." He looked up with a slight smile. "They're particularly impressed by your transformation from Eastern factory worker to avenging angel of justice." Charlotte couldn't help but laugh at the florid description. "Hardly an angel, just someone who couldn't walk away from a clear injustice." "You did more than not walk away," Cooper reminded her. "You actively pursued the case when most would have sold the mine and returned east with a comfortable fortune." A more subdued knock preceded Martha's entrance with a telegram. "From Mr. Reynolds," she explained, handing the yellow paper to Charlotte. Charlotte read it quickly, then looked up with relief. "The judge in Silver Creek has dismissed all charges against Samuel Tucker's men related to the confrontation at Silver Crest, self-defense in protection of private property." "Excellent news," Cooper observed. "And Reed?" "Remains in custody in Denver, awaiting separate trial for attempted murder and conspiracy." Charlotte set the telegram aside. "Have you heard anything from Thomas?" Cooper nodded. "A letter arrived this morning. He's settled in Washington with his family under federal protection. His testimony before the Senate Committee on Railroad Safety is scheduled for next month." The reuniting of Thomas Grant with his wife and daughter had been one of the most emotionally satisfying outcomes of the past months. After 5 years of separation and hiding, the family was together again, protected by federal marshals, while Grant provided crucial testimony about railroad safety violations. Charlotte moved to the writing desk, where maps and documents were spread out, not evidence this time, but plans for the future. "The engineers believe we can complete the memorial by autumn," she said, indicating drawings for a stone monument to be erected near the site of the tunnel collapse. Each victim's name is engraved, along with the date and an inscription. "What will the inscription say?" Martha asked, joining them at the desk. "Justice delayed is not justice denied," Charlotte replied. Nathan's words from his journal. A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Rapid footsteps, excited voices. Elizabeth Cooper burst into the room without knocking, her face flushed with excitement. "The verdict is in," she announced breathlessly. "Father, Mrs. Sullivan, they're reconvening the court in 30 minutes. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Journalists and spectators crammed together in oppressive heat, despite the open windows. Charlotte sat in the front row beside Cooper and Martha, her back straight, her expression composed, despite the nervous fluttering in her stomach. Across the aisle, the defendants presented a study in contrasts. Victor Blackwood, defiant to the end, glaring at Charlotte with undisguised hatred. The other trustees of Sinclair Investment Trust, pale and resigned, their aristocratic bearing diminished by months of public scrutiny and incarceration. The judge entered, and the crowded room rose then settled into breathless silence as the jury filed in. The foreman, a silver-haired rancher with weathered hands, handed a folded paper to the clerk. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman replied. Time seemed to slow as the clerk unfolded the paper. Charlotte felt Cooper's hand cover hers briefly in a gesture of support. "On the count of criminal negligence resulting in death, how do you find?" "We find the defendants guilty." A murmur swept the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. "On the count of conspiracy to obstruct justice, how do you find?" "We find the defendants guilty." The remaining charges received the same verdict. Guilty on all counts. Charlotte sat perfectly still, absorbing the moment, thinking of Nathan's long quest for justice finally fulfilled, of 37 families who might find some small measure of peace in this outcome. Victor Blackwood's face contorted with rage. As the judge announced the sentences, substantial prison terms for all defendants, massive financial penalties, and the establishment of a fund for the victims' families administered by an independent trustee. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Charlotte, Cooper, and the prosecution team. Questions flew from all directions, but Charlotte addressed only one, from a young female journalist who had covered the trial since its beginning. "Mrs. Sullivan, now that justice has been served, what will you do next?" Charlotte considered the question carefully. "The Silver Crest mine will continue operations under Samuel Tucker's management with a profit-sharing program for all workers. The Sullivan Foundation will use its resources to advocate for improved safety regulations and corporate accountability." She paused. "As for me personally, I'll return to Silver Creek. It's my home now." Later that evening, Charlotte hosted a small gathering in her hotel suite. Cooper and Elizabeth, Martha and Frank Reynolds, the lead prosecutor and his wife, and Samuel Tucker, who had arrived from Silver Creek for the verdict. They toasted their victory with champagne, celebrating not just the legal outcome, but the bonds formed through shared purpose. As the others engaged in animated conversation, Charlotte stepped onto the balcony for a moment of solitude. The spring evening was mild, stars emerging in the darkening sky above Denver's gaslit streets. She touched the silver locket at her throat, Eleanor Sinclair's portrait inside, a tangible connection to the family whose name had been both a burden and legacy to her son. Cooper joined her, offering a fresh glass of champagne. "A penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Sullivan? Or should I finally start calling you Charlotte, now that our formal business is concluded?" She smiled. "Charlotte would be fine, though I've grown accustomed to Mrs. Sullivan. It feels like my name now, in a way I never anticipated. Identity is a curious thing, Cooper observed. Nathan found freedom in abandoning his, while you discovered your strength in assuming a new one. Not entirely new, Charlotte countered. The Charlotte who stepped off that train in Silver Creek still exists. Her experiences, her values, her determination. She simply found a larger stage for those qualities. They stood in companionable silence, watching the city below. Finally, Cooper spoke again, his tone more hesitant than usual. I've been offered a position at the Treasury Department in Washington, financial oversight of railroad companies. They were quite impressed by my testimony and expertise. That's wonderful, Charlotte said sincerely. They couldn't have chosen better. Elizabeth would join me, of course. She's become quite passionate about women's suffrage since our Colorado adventure. He hesitated. I was wondering if you might consider visiting Washington occasionally. The Sullivan Foundation's advocacy would be more effective with a presence in the capital. Charlotte recognized the invitation beneath the practical suggestion, not a romantic overture precisely, but an opening for something that might evolve beyond their current partnership. The idea wasn't unwelcome, she realized with some surprise. I might consider it, she replied, though Silver Creek will remain my base of operations. Of course, Cooper agreed quickly. Your connection to the community there is important. Inside, Martha began gathering empty glasses, signaling the evening's conclusion. One by one, their guests departed until only Martha remained, busy with final tidying. You should rest, Charlotte told her. Tomorrow will be another busy day. Interviews with the Eastern papers, meetings with the trust administrators. Martha paused, studying Charlotte with the penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond surface appearances. He would be proud of you, she said simply. Nathaniel, or Nathan, I suppose I should say. I hope so, Charlotte replied softly. I never knew him, not really, yet his life changed mine completely. Perhaps that's his true legacy, Martha suggested. Not just justice for those men who died, but the transformation he inspired in you, in all of us who joined his cause. The observation resonated deeply. Charlotte had arrived in Silver Creek, expecting to transform from factory worker to wife. Instead, she had become an heiress, an advocate, a force for justice, roles she could never have imagined on that train journey west. The following day, after completing her remaining obligations in Denver, Charlotte boarded the train for Silver Creek. As the locomotive pulled away from the station, she watched the city recede, thinking about the circular nature of her journey. Arriving as a mail-order bride with uncertain prospects, returning now as a woman of means and influence, respected and even somewhat feared in certain circles. The train wound through the foothills, gradually climbing toward the mountain pass that guarded the approach to Silver Creek. When the conductor announced they were nearing the summit, Charlotte moved to the observation platform at the rear of the train, eager for her first glimpse of the valley that had become home. As they crested the pass, the landscape opened before her. Silver Creek nestled in its valley, the town's buildings glinting in the afternoon sun, and on the mountainside above, Silver Crest standing proud and solid, its windows catching the light like beacons. The sight filled Charlotte with unexpected emotion. 6 months ago, she had made this same journey, as a desperate woman seeking security through marriage to a stranger. The twist of fate that had transformed that journey into something entirely different still seemed miraculous in retrospect. Nathan Sinclair had died before she truly met him. Yet his final act, entrusting her with his fortune and his quest for justice, had given her far more than a conventional marriage ever could have. It had given her purpose, community, and a sense of her own capabilities that no previous experience had revealed. As the train began its descent into the valley, Charlotte reflected on Martha's words about Nathan's legacy. The justice he sought had been achieved, but perhaps his greater gift had been the opportunity for transformation, not just for Charlotte, but for all whose lives had intersected with his quest. The mail-order bride who had arrived to find her. Groom dying had become the woman who fulfilled his final mission and then discovered her own. Charlotte Harrington had stepped off the train in Silver Creek 6 months ago. Mrs. Nathaniel Sullivan would step back onto its platform today. The name still technically a fiction, but the identity, the purpose, and the future it represented were undeniably, authentically her own. The train whistle sounded as they approached the station. Charlotte gathered her belongings, ready to return to Silver Crest, to the life she had created from the most unlikely of beginnings. A deathbed confession, a hidden fortune, and a secret identity that had ultimately revealed her truest self. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.